Welcome back to Doctors Teach. This is the podcast where we talk about all the things that make resident education both powerful and a little complicated, like remediation. Today's topic: should residents help build their own remediation plan? Now, before we all panic, don't worry, I'm not suggesting you hand over the curriculum and say, go ahead and fix yourself. But I am saying that the way we involve residents, not in building the plan, but in responding to it, reflecting on it, and adjusting it, can make or break the entire process. So if you've ever wondered how to walk that fine line between we're here to support you and this isn't a negotiation, this episode is absolutely for you. All right, let's get one thing clear right out of the gate. The remediation plan is not a group project. This isn't the time for a roundtable discussion about what everyone thinks might help. The plan should absolutely be created by faculty and program leadership based on things like data, milestones progress, documented performance concerns, and the overall goals of your training program. Remediation is a professional intervention and it needs structure, and that structure comes from you, the faculty. You're the faculty directly involved in the remediation team. Yes, it's important to be supportive, but the process must remain objective and faculty-led and aligned with program expectations, not preferences. So the resident here is the learner, not the co-author. So I just wanted to get that clear right out of the gate. I think there is a time and a place for resident involvement, but developing the plan, not one of them. All right, so I say that all with a caveat. Residents shouldn't be left in the dark. So what I am saying is, all right, that doesn't mean we need to keep them in the dark like this is some kind of secret disciplinary file. That's not the vibe we're going for, but the resident should understand what's in the plan, be clear on why it was created. They need to know what success looks like. And most importantly, I feel like they need to feel safe asking questions. When residents don't know the why behind the plan, they're more likely to get defensive, start shutting down, or even misunderstand the purpose of the remediation itself. And so once that happens, you've lost half the battle there. You don't need to let them rewrite the plan, but you do need to invite them into the process once it's already in motion. So let's look at a case example. This is a case of the defensive resident who let their guard down. Yeah, we've all seen this one before, but this case might sound a little bit familiar. All right, in this example, there's a resident who came into the remediation process understandably defensive. We've talked about this in previous episodes. They often feel very shocked, embarrassed, and really unsure of what this means for their future. So they're scared. In this case, the faculty delivered the plan calmly, explained the specific observations and concerns, and reviewed how progress would be tracked. All right, so the twist in this case: the plan also included a weekly self-assessment, just a simple form that asks, all right, what went well this week? What didn't? What feedback did you receive? And where do you feel stuck? So at first, the resident filled it out mechanically, but by week 3, the tone actually shifted. They started sharing real reflections. They even said, I don't think the journal club assignment is helping me improve in the way that I need. Could we try a different approach? So guess what? We reviewed the data, agreed with the insight, and adjusted that portion of the plan. They didn't rewrite the plan, but they certainly engaged with it. And in this situation, it worked. This is just one example of ways that we can be flexible in our remediation plans. It's a great way to engage residents and allow them to have some input into what works for them and not just what works to satisfy the remediation plan itself. So let's talk strategy. Strategy number 1, use resident self-assessments often. One of the simplest but most powerful ways to involve residents meaningfully without handing over control is to include regular self-assessments in your plan. Now, I'm not talking about 45-question Likert scales. Those are awful. What I really mean is real reflection prompts. So asking the resident, where did you notice improvement? What feedback did you get? How did you respond to that feedback? And where are you still unsure or struggling? So in many of my remediation meetings with residents, I ask for them to keep a feedback log. And at first, they don't want to do it. Let's be real. They don't want to write it down. But when we start to really use those logs in our remediation meetings, it becomes very meaningful in terms of noticing patterns of, all right, what feedback are you consistently getting? Are there some patterns? How did you respond to that feedback? And where are you still struggling? These are things that we can certainly discuss in those remediation meeting minutes to kind of say, all right, the resident has some insight. So that self-assessment itself is a window into insight. Sometimes it shows alignment between what the resident sees and what the faculty observe, which that is wonderful. But other times it reveals blind spots that help guide your next steps. So that's good too. Either way, it's invaluable and it doesn't require you to give up structure. Strategy number 2, discuss what's working and what's not working. We can do this in a variety of ways, but remediation plans should be living, breathing documents. They're structured, but they're not set in stone. That's why midpoint check-ins matter. Not just to monitor progress, but to ask, hey, what's helping you? What's not helping you? Do you feel the activities are building the skills we're targeting? I would say, from my perspective, midpoint check-ins are great, but there needs to be continuous meetings along the way, whether that's weekly check-ins, bi-weekly check-ins. There have to be a lot of checkpoints along the way. This is not a self-guided process, although residents do need to be self-directed in the way that they kind of maintain and show growth, but the midpoint check-in does matter. These conversations don't mean that we throw out the plan. They just let us fine-tune it. More importantly, they show the resident that they're not being punished, that they're actually being coached instead. All right, diving into strategy number 3, let residents own their progress. So even though the faculty creates the plan, the resident owns the outcome. So that's something that we need to remind ourselves as faculty and also remind the resident, like, we can give you the tools, we can guide you, but ultimately you're the master of your own destiny. We can encourage them to track their goals, reflect on the feedback, communicate when something's unclear, and they need to speak up when they hit a wall. But they also can bring forward evidence. If there's some part of data collection that we're just not seeing, or a specific milestone that maybe we're not able to document as something that they have accomplished, it's their role to be able to provide those specific examples and evidence to say, hey, I know you may not have had the chance to document this or directly observe this, but here's what I've been doing and how I was able to meet this particular milestone or competency. This is professional development in action. If they want to move forward in the training, they have to take accountability, not just for doing the task, but for internalizing the growth. And this is a huge mindset shift. This mindset shift is from passive recipient to active participant. And it's what makes remediation work a lot of the times. And you'll see it midway through the remediation. Maybe a light goes off and you can see it during a remediation meeting when you can just tell that the resident gets it and they're past the point of kind of holding the grudge or feeling like remediation is something that's being done to them, and that they really do have a say in the whole process and what their outcome is at the end. All right, one of my favorites, let's talk about where collaboration actually belongs in the process. So, no, residents shouldn't help write the plan, but what they can do is review it, reflect on it, and help adjust it when needed. And they can also offer insight that deepens the faculty's understanding of what's working and what isn't. So, collaboration in remediation doesn't mean co creation, it means co investment. And just a quick recap: input, not ownership. Here's the bottom line: you, the faculty, build the remediation plan. That's your job. That's my job. It's my responsibility. And honestly, that's where the structure comes from. But the resident, they're not just a passive recipient of the plan. They're the one doing the actual work. They're living the experience. They're feeling the pressure. They may be a little wounded in the beginning, but once they start to see that your guidance is what is going to take them from this passive learner to this active participant, it just makes sense to invite their voice into the process, not to dictate the structure, but to really help you fine-tune the delivery. When residents are able to reflect honestly, when they share what's helping and what's not, when they engage in the execution of the actual plan, that's when the real momentum starts. Their input isn't about handing over ownership. It's about building insight and collaboration, and ultimately, it's about building growth. So letting them be a part of that process is something that I think will take every resident to the next level. All right, my final thoughts on this episode: collaboration doesn't equal co-creation. Residents don't need to co-write the remediation plan, but they do need clarity, agency, and support throughout it. We need to give them a chance to reflect, give them a space to be able to talk about how they're making changes and really the things that are helping them the most, and maybe things that aren't helping them. We give them structure, and we also give them the room to be vulnerable without feeling judged. One of the things that I love to tell my residents in remediation, and of course, when I'm consulting with other programs and their residents in remediation, that being vulnerable is a scary thing, but it's also a true gift in the world of remediation, because once they're able to let their guard down and to really absorb all of the information and guidance they're being given, that's where the real growth happens. All right, so next time on Doctors Teach, we're giving a huge shout out to the person behind the curtain, the one managing all the logistics, all the emails, all the documentation, and emotional support too. Yep, that's right. We're going to talk about the program coordinator. You're going to want to stick around for that one. If this episode helped clarify the role residents should play in remediation, if you wouldn't mind, leave a quick review or send it to someone planning their next intervention. Let's build structure and space for growth. Thank you so much for supporting my podcast. If you're watching on YouTube and you want tools that help faculty design structured, defensible remediation plans, then download the free intro lesson of the Elevate Remediation Fast Track course. Or you can take the remediation risk assessment at www.docmaclearning.com. Links are in the descriptions. Grab what works and make your next plan your best one yet. And I'll see you in the next episode.